Last week was Mother's Day, and we still stayed in the book of John, but we sort of skipped ahead to look at those who gathered around the cross, and we saw the mother of Jesus there and how Jesus changed the relationship that he had with the woman who brought him into this world, and that he gave the care of Mary to his disciple John, and he established that on the cross. And it was a reminder to us about our own family responsibilities, but also a reminder to us that whenever we are at a point of need in our lives, Jesus is there for us. And that's what the cross is all about, is to remind us that though Mary was blessed among women, that Mary needed a Savior also. And that Mary at that point had to come to a place to recognize this was not just the child that she had given birth to, but this was the great Messiah that had come. When you get to the upper room as they're there praying before the day of Pentecost, one of those believers that you find there is Mary. And so this morning I want us to go back, and for the next few weeks we're going to behold the man. And I want us to look this morning, John chapter 19 and beginning in verse 1. This is after the Jewish trial, and they brought him to Pilate. And we know, according, as you take all the synoptic gospels and all the accounts together, we know that there was a series of mockeries that were done there. That they brought him before the Sanhedrin, and they abused him there. And then they took him before Pilate, and he didn't want to deal with him, found out where he was from, sent him to Herod. Now they've sent him back to Pilate. Pilate has tried, and you'll see that he tries so much to set him free, to release Jesus. But we start in John chapter 19 and verse 1. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and put a purple robe on him. And they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews," and then to give him a slaps in the face. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I am bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." And Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." If you stop and think about the horror that they saw as Jesus stood there, already being beaten, already scourged, where they had taken that cat of nine tails, and Isaiah says as you looked at him, his visage, you could not even tell that he was a man. He was just a beaten, broken man that was before them with a crown of thorns, and that's what we're going to look at this morning. And it's more than us, more for us than just a historical description. For believers, it's more than just a philosophical thought of what God has done. It's more than just an understanding that leads us to understand the doctrine of grace. It's all those things, but for us, we have to understand it was a physical beating. It was a physical suffering. It was a public execution, and that Jesus endured it all. I don't know of any words, though they are poetic and we can get lost in that, but I don't know any words that put it more eloquently and more precise than Isaiah 53. I read this last week, but I ought to read it every day. Verse 3 says, "He was despised." Have you ever been despised? "He was forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hid their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him." This is the God of creation. This is the God of glory. This is the God who did all the miracles that they had seen, and yet we esteemed him not. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own ways, and the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. Not 1 ounce of blood, not 1 drop of blood. From that Garden of Gethsemane, from that place where it says that he sweat drops of blood. We know the medical reasoning behind that it's under undue stress, under such a harsh anxiety that the capillaries begin to break down into the sweat glands and allows blood to come in. And it's got a name about that long, but very few cases of people. But we know why it happens. And Jesus there in the garden, as he prayed, Lord, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done, knowing what he was about to face. Not 1 drop of blood, not 1 drop of blood that fell from the scourging, not 1 drop of blood that covered his body as he hung there on the cross was for himself. It was for you. It was for me. He was the sinless Son of God. Think about what that means. Jesus never told a lie. Some of y'all, I can tell when you're lying. Your lips are moving. We've all told lies, haven't we? He never told a lie. Jesus never had a selfish thought. Jesus wasn't David. He didn't stay up on the roof and look and lust. Jesus wasn't like Balaam. He wasn't in it for the money. Jesus wasn't like Jonah. He wasn't running from God's calling. And Jesus wasn't like you. And Jesus wasn't like me. Jesus went to that cross, and though he be tempted in every way as we have been, yet he never sinned. You listen to those words again. Isaiah 53. He was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. But the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. Paul wrote it in Romans. He said, but God demonstrated his love for us in that while we were yet sinners, that Christ died for us. This mighty Roman Empire stretched from North Africa and all around the Mediterranean Sea and all the way up into Spain. And Josephus wrote that the worst outpost, the most dreaded outpost, was in Jerusalem. It was in Israel. And as a matter of fact, he wrote that most of the soldiers that were there were in trouble of some sort. Either they were there because they had done something and it was revenge of their officers that sent them to this outpost, or they had committed some crime, so they were being punished by being sent, or that they had done something completely immoral with some other, not against a Roman, but against someone else, and that they were ruling, and they were sent for punishment there to Israel. These are the worst men, the angry men. These are men who hate where they are. And now then, this one named King of the Jews is in front of them. So these were men who were demonic, satanic. These were men who afflicted pain. These were men who were mad at the world. These were men who had all the power. And whenever it was time to hurt, they hurt because they hurt. And they took it all out on Jesus. You could not even tell that he was a man. And I want to look this morning at the crown of thorns, the material of the crown of thorns. They plaited together in their mockery. For some, now it's called, if you go there and you see the plant in the Holy Land now, it's just simply called the crown of thorns. Some have called it Julius thorns. It is as hard as a nail. 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 inch thorns that are on it, and hard as ivory. And so as they plaited that together and put it in him, and that had such its sting would affect the nervous system in a special way. It felt like a pepper sauce running through your veins. It felt like burning, like heat, as some have said. And how they did that and why they did it for their own reason, but it wasn't incidental. It wasn't just an accident that they did that. This represented, they thought, making a mockery of King of the Jews, but it means something else for us. And if you look at this and think about all the way back to Eden, Adam, first cutting of roses to take to his wife Eve. You know what it was missing? Thorns. We read in Genesis 3, after the fall of man, verse 17, then to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, then cursed is the ground because of you. And told, you will eat of it all the days of your life, both thorns and thistles it will grow for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. The thorns represent the painful fruit of sin. It is for us spiritually like an atomic bomb, all the fallout, and it affects everything. And that affects for a long time. That sin of Adam and Eve, we still feel the consequences of that. And even our own sin has consequences to it. And it brings great fear to me, even though we are believers, and even though we have forgiveness, and even though we tell people they can be forgiven of their sin, the consequence of sin lasts for generations sometimes. Because of something that my grandfather did, the influence of that upon his family and the influence of that family upon my family, still we have to deal with the consequence of it. God gives us grace for that, but that's how serious sin is. God sees us through that, but that's how serious sin is. If you stop and think, as this world in the midst of it, what this simple crown of thorns represents. This crown of thorn represents the misery. Sin brings misery into our life. The world glamorizes sin. Oh, it's the thing to do. But it always has consequences. And it always has pain. And it always brings misery. I've preached against it. You know my feelings about alcohol. Is it wrong for a person to take you take the ingredients and you brew them up and you drink that? Is it wrong for somebody to have a can of beer a day? It's not the can of beer a day that I have a problem with. It's the meat offered to idols principle. It's not. I've had numerous doctors tell me I ought to drink a can of beer a day because of the kidney stones. Had another doctor tell me I need to drink a glass of wine to help my cholesterol. Had another doctor tell me I ought to drink a shot of whiskey so that I could go to sleep at night. If I listen to my doctors, I'm going to be an alcoholic. So it's not necessarily drinking that, but it's the testimony of it. It's the meat offered to idols. Paul said, I don't care. Go get a steak from the market. Doesn't bother me, but there are some who see them and say, they're buying meat that's been offered to idols. I thought he was a Christian. When Emily was little, about 6 years old maybe, we snuck home and my daddy was in there on his radio and he was talking somewhere around the world, and he had this terrible disease. This whole side of his jaw was poking up. He had chewed tobacco in his mouth. And Emily walked in, she's going to hug him, and she looked up in that frail little voice. She looked at my daddy and she said, Pawpaw, I thought you were a Christian. You know, my daddy never chewed tobacco in front of his grandchildren ever again. That bothered my daddy. And I was kind of glad it bothered my daddy. But that's the principle. If people see us doing it and they say, that's not something that a Christian ought to do, then have we brought glory to the name of Christ? I know you expect that I'm not going to be in the store with you and I'm going to buy beer or liquor of any sort. I never have. But what do other people think of you? So I've preached about that. You know my feelings about that. But let me just talk about how simple, how sin works. I read an article this week. Dr. Peter Grinspoon, he's a medical doctor at Harvard. And he wrote an article about gaming. I know all the millennials say, there he goes, the old man talking about gaming. Why don't you kids get off your phone? And I know what he's going to say. I got so tickled, I've told it before, but right in front of the old post office, there was I know it was a grandmother, and she was walking out. I'm sure she had paid her bill, and her grandson, 10 years old or something, walking just in front of her, and she was feeling something, and his pants were sagging down to about right here, and he was busy playing on the game, and she was putting stuff in her purse, and whenever she looked up and she saw him, she slapped him on the back of the head and said, pull up your pants and put that phone in your pocket. I'm not here to slap you in the head and tell you to pull up your pants and put your phone in your pocket. But if your pants are sagging, pull up your pants. And if you're playing with your phone, put up your phone, okay? But this study said that gaming is dangerous. The overuse of the muscles and tendons, that you get gamer's thumb. And more people are having problem with the carpal tunnel syndrome. And that arthritis is setting up in 14, 15-year-olds. The overuse is dangerous. And then he goes on and he says that the tendons become so inflamed that they get tennis elbow, and they carry that out the rest of their life. Who's got, not from this, but who's got tennis elbow or ever had a problem with it? Isn't it bad? It's terrible. Quit doing that. Take up tennis. Here's another. It leads to trigger finger. Some of y'all have had surgery for trigger finger. You're bringing it on. We're going to see a whole generation. It's affecting their eyes. It's affecting their overeating and obesity that we're seeing in children that are 6 years old. Go out and play, and not on a video game. And then this is the problem. This is the real problem. He talked greatly about the full-on addiction, and said the addiction that it causes is worse than addiction to some outward stimulus of alcohol or drugs, because it's all happening in the mind. And there's such an addiction that even when they're not playing, they're thinking of playing, and in such a way that they drop everything in their life. They move down into their mother's basement and the whole world goes away. Well, that's why we bought a house without a basement. But isn't that sad? Folks, that's what sin does to us. It just seems so fun and so innocent at first. Just a little flirtatious. Oh, just a little sip, just a little drag, just a little bit. They'll think so much more of you. You'll be cool. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just a game. But whenever it comes to be the master of your life, it's become more than a game and more than cool. James chapter 1, verse 14, but each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. The crown of thorns reminds us of the misery. The crown of thorns also reminds us of the mockery. The world was mocking Jesus that day. That's why they put the crown of thorns and beat it onto him, so they could say, oh, hell, King of the Jews, and then they'd slap him in the face. They were mocking him. You know what the world is doing even now? They are mocking you because you follow Jesus. There's a song on the Christian radio now. I wish I'd have thought earlier and wrote the words, but it says, who are the ones that follow Jesus? Who are the ones that do all these things? Who are the ones that carry their Bible into a public school? Who are the ones that stood and were martyred? Who are the ones that speak the name of Jesus into this world? It's crazy people following Jesus. Well, I hope I'm known as a crazy person following Jesus. When there's a crowd, I did this not too long ago. There was a crowd of gentlemen who were standing there, And I was the only white guy that was going to be in that group, but I walked up into the middle of them and said, "Y'all having a good day?" They got real quiet. Said, "Yeah." One of them said, "You're the preacher down at First Baptist, aren't you?" I said, "I'm not preaching today." And I said, "You gentlemen go to church anywhere? I want to invite y'all if y'all want to come Sunday morning." They all said, "Thank you." And in just a little bit, they were gone. I know how to break up a crowd. You just go up in there and talk about Jesus, and you'll likely break up a crowd, but there may be one that stays. The world is mocking him today. Hebrews 12:2 says, "Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God." I'm here to tell you that you are going to endure because you follow Jesus. There are going to be people who will despise you because you follow Jesus. There will be people who will mock you when you follow Jesus. But I learned something this week. I want to share it with you. I've read this passage and studied this passage many times, but Hebrews 12:2 uses a word despising the shame. I've always kind of thought of that as he was dreading the shame. He despised it. He dreaded it. But really and truly, that is not the best rendering of understanding. The word literally means absorbing the shame. It speaks even more about what Jesus did. He absorbed the shame. He took it upon himself. If you put a sponge down, this past week, Emily was here, and I know if y'all saw her out, y'all thought that she was painting cabinets, and it looked like I was painting Emily. But I was painting cabinets too. She had paint all over everywhere. But I had a little jug of paint, and I was painting, and I looked and I said, "Now don't spill that paint." Kind of know where that goes, don't you? So I was painting, and I looked down. I just steady pouring it down on the ground. You know what I did? I grabbed a towel right at first, and I threw it on top of it. Why? Because I was hoping that towel would absorb that paint and take some of that paint and help me clean up that paint. Whenever they mocked Jesus, he absorbed the shame of it. I know this is kind of contrary to the Southern way of dealing with conflict. I was not taught to absorb the shame. I was taught to stand on my own 2 feet. I was taught to stand up tall. And I was taught that you never run away from a fight. Now that's what I was taught. And I abided by those teachings for most of my childhood. I got sent to the office one time for every 12 years that I was in school. And I will tell you the overwhelming majority of that was because there was somebody picking on somebody, and I don't like a bully. Now the reason I think for that is my sister, Donna. She was here last Sunday. Donna was 6 feet tall in the 5th grade. Did you hear me? 5th grade. Do you know any 5th grade girls? They can be the sweetest things, or they can be the meanest creatures that have ever walked this earth. The Tasmanian devil down, that's the pattern that they follow. And because of that, I grew angry, and I sinned a lot because I would grow angry and then I would take it out and stand up for my sister. There wasn't a boy in Monroe County I was really afraid of. I was only afraid of my sister. So I got sent to the office every year for taking up for somebody. That's not the way we deal with sin. That's wrong. I was wrong. Here's how you deal with sin or mockery. When somebody's mocking you because of your faith, you keep your mouth shut. You absorb it. You take it. And then you look at that person and smile. And if you cannot think of anything to say that's positive, you just look at them and say, "God bless you," and walk away. And I promise you, of all the things that they'll say about you, your pride may step up and say, what have you done? Man, you embarrassed me. Well, you will look back on that situation and be thankful, because it may give you an opportunity to point them to Jesus. Jesus understood about the mockery. Psalm chapter 2 and verses 1 and following says, why are the nations in an uproar and the peoples devising a vain thing? The king of the earth take their stand, and rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens worries. That's not what it says. Whenever the world is making all this racket about God, the one who sits in heaven laughs at them. He scoffs at them. And you're going to do what? I mean, Hebrews says, what can they do to me other than kill me? That's all they can do. Oh yeah, that's a big thing. I don't want them to do that. But that's all they can do. Absorb it and give glory to God. And that does something about your relationship with your Heavenly Father, instead of idiots who are trying to bait you into sin and wanting to hurt you. We looked at the material and the misery and the mockery, but you need to know the meaning of the crown of thorns. Jesus bore my sin. That's what the crown of thorns represents. You know why? So he can forgive me. Jesus bore the misery of the thorns. You know why? So he can heal me. Jesus bore the mockery of my sin so that I can be unashamed of the gospel. Jesus bore it all because Jesus makes all things new. Revelation 21 and verse 3 says, and I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no longer any death. There will no longer be any mourning, nor crying, nor pain. The first things have passed away. He who sits on the throne said, behold, I'm making all things new. And he said, write, for these words are faithful and true. And he said to me, it is done. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of the water of life without cost. He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. Chapter 22 and verse 3 says this, and there will be no more curse. But the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. I'm going to be able to pick all the roses that I want to pick, and there won't be a single thorn there. Whatever we're doing in heaven, which I'm not floating on a cloud, whatever we're doing in heaven, I'm going to be serving him. And my back won't hurt, and my hands won't hurt, and my hips won't hurt. I don't need to give you the anatomy lesson. I won't hurt. I won't need these. I won't have chapped lips. I'm going to be made so that I can serve him. Today I can have that kind of confidence because Jesus went to the cross and because he wore a plaited crown of thorns and that he accomplished the work of my salvation. Today he offers that salvation to you. Father, I pray that here in this